The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the modest apartment in the old part of the city, casting long shadows across the worn wooden floors. Sarah Chun stood at the kitchen counter, her hands moving automatically as she prepared breakfast for her family. The smell of fresh coffee filled the small space, mixing with the aroma of eggs and toast. She was a woman of 35, though the tiredness in her eyes made her appear older. Her hair, once lustrous and black, was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore clothes that spoke of practicality rather than fashion. From the bedroom came the sound of her husband Richard stirring, and Sarah felt her heart tighten in the familiar way it always did these days. 10 years of marriage had changed so many things between them, though she still remembered the young man who had swept her off her feet when they were both struggling university students. Back then, Richard had dreams as big as the sky, and Sarah had believed in every single one of them. Their 2 children, Emma, who was 8, and little Michael, who was 5, would be waking soon for school. Sarah glanced at the clock on the wall, a cheap plastic thing that had replaced the beautiful antique clock Richard had sold during one of his many failed business ventures. She had stopped counting the money they had lost over the years. What hurt more than the financial struggles was watching her husband's spirit slowly break with each disappointment. Richard emerged from the bedroom, his hair disheveled and his face carrying the permanent scowl that had become his default expression. He barely looked at Sarah as he took his seat at the small dining table, reaching for the newspaper that was already laid out for him. This too was a habit Sarah maintained, though she could not remember the last time he had thanked her for it. "The coffee is ready," Sarah said softly, setting a cup before him. Richard grunted in response, his eyes scanning the business section of the newspaper. Sarah watched him for a moment, remembering a time when he would pull her into his lap at this very table, kissing her neck and making her laugh. Those memories felt like they belonged to someone else's life now. The children burst into the kitchen with the energy that only young children possess, and Sarah's face immediately brightened. Emma, with her mother's dark hair and her father's determined jaw, was already dressed in her school uniform. Michael, still rubbing sleep from his eyes, climbed onto his chair and reached for the orange juice. "Good morning, my loves," Sarah said, bending to kiss each of them on the forehead. "Did you sleep well? Mommy, can we go to the park after school?" Emma asked, her eyes hopeful. Before Sarah could answer, Richard spoke without looking up from his paper. "Your mother doesn't have time for parks. Some of us have to work." Sarah felt the sting of his words but kept her expression neutral for the children's sake. "We'll see, sweetheart. Eat your breakfast now." The truth was that Richard's comment was deeply unfair. While he went to work at the marketing firm where he had been employed for the past 3 years, Sarah managed everything else. She cleaned, cooked, took care of the children, helped with their homework, and still found time to do freelance translation work late into the night. The money she earned from those translations was often what kept their family afloat during the months when Richard's sales commissions fell short. But Sarah never mentioned this to Richard. She had learned long ago that challenging him on such matters only led to arguments that frightened the children and solved nothing. It was easier to absorb his frustrations, to be the calm center around which their small family orbited. What Richard did not know, what no one in their modest neighborhood or among their small circle of acquaintances knew, was that Sarah Chun was not the ordinary housewife she appeared to be. Behind the simple clothes and the tired eyes lay a secret so significant that it would have shaken the foundations of their marriage had Richard ever discovered it. Sarah was the sole owner of Meridian Technologies, one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the country. The company her late father had founded 30 years ago had grown into a billion-dollar enterprise under the careful guidance of executives Sarah had handpicked and trustees who managed the business in her name. Every month, millions of dollars flowed through accounts that bore her maiden name, Chun Wei-lin, the name she had stopped using the day she married Richard. Her father, Chun Wei-ming, had been a visionary in the technology sector. Starting with nothing but a brilliant mind and an unshakable work ethic, he had built Meridian from a small startup in a rented garage to a corporation that employed thousands of people across the globe. When he passed away 5 years ago, He had left everything to his only daughter, the child he had raised alone after his wife died during childbirth. But there was a condition to Sarah's inheritance, one that her father had made clear in his final days. He had seen too many wealthy families torn apart by money, too many marriages destroyed by the complications that came with great wealth. He had made Sarah promise that if she ever married, she would keep her wealth hidden until she was absolutely certain that her husband loved her for who she was, not for what she had. Test him. Her father had whispered from his hospital bed, his hand gripping hers with surprising strength. Real love doesn't need money. Real love stays when things are hard. Promise me you'll wait until you're sure. Sarah had promised, and she had kept that promise even as her marriage crumbled around her. When she had met Richard, she had already been wealthy beyond imagination, but she had presented herself as a struggling student working her way through university. Richard had been charming and ambitious, and he had seemed to love her with a passion that made her believe she had found the partner her father had spoken of. They had married in a simple ceremony, and Sarah had continued to hide her true identity, waiting for the right moment to reveal everything. But that moment had never come. As the years passed and Richard's business ventures failed one after another, he had grown bitter and distant. The man who had once looked at her with adoration now seemed to resent her very presence. Sarah had watched and waited, hoping that adversity would reveal the strength of character she believed he possessed. Instead, it had revealed something else entirely. Still, she stayed, partly for the children who deserved a father in their lives, partly because she still harbored a small, stubborn hope that the Richard she had fallen in love with was still in there somewhere, buried beneath years of disappointment and failure, and partly because she was not sure she could bear to admit that her father might have been right to be cautious. After Richard left for work that morning, barely acknowledging the children's goodbye kisses, Sarah walked Emma and Michael to the school bus stop. She stood with the other mothers, listening to their chatter about sales at the local supermarket and complaints about their husbands. Sarah participated in these conversations just enough to avoid seeming unfriendly, but her mind was always elsewhere. Today, she was thinking about the board meeting that was happening at Meridian's headquarters across the city. Her trusted proxy, a lawyer named James Wu who had worked with her father for decades, would be attending in her place as he always did. He would call her this afternoon with updates, speaking in the coded language they had developed over the years to protect her identity. The children boarded the bus, and Sarah watched until it disappeared around the corner. Then, she walked back to their apartment, her steps slow and measured. She had a translation project to complete, a technical manual for a German engineering company. It was tedious work, but she found a certain peace in it. The precision required left no room for the painful thoughts that otherwise crowded her mind. Her phone buzzed as she entered the apartment. It was a text from James. Meeting confirmed for 2 p.m. Several important items on the agenda. We'll call after. Sarah typed back a brief acknowledgement and then settled at her small desk in the corner of the living room. The laptop she used was deliberately old and slow, consistent with their apparent financial situation. Richard had offered several times to let her use his newer computer, but Sarah had always declined. The older machine served as just another layer of protection for her secret. By noon, she had completed half the translation and had prepared a simple lunch for herself. She was eating at the kitchen table, the apartment silent around her, when her phone rang with an unknown number. Mrs. Davis? The voice on the other end was young and female, slightly nervous. Yes. Sarah used her married name in all public dealings. This is Jennifer from Brightstone Marketing. I'm calling because, well, there's been a situation with your husband. Sarah's heart dropped. What kind of situation? Is he hurt? No, nothing like that. There was an awkward pause. It's just, he was supposed to attend a client meeting this afternoon, but he left the office early. He said he had a family emergency, but when I tried to call you to confirm, I realized we had an old number on file. Your husband gave me this number himself last week. Said it was for emergencies. Sarah's mind raced. A family emergency? There was no emergency. The children were at school and she was perfectly fine. "Thank you for letting me know," she said carefully. "I'll sort it out." After hanging up, Sarah sat very still for a long moment. This was not the first time Richard had left work unexpectedly with an excuse that did not hold up. There had been other afternoons when he came home smelling of perfume he claimed was from a coworker's hug, other evenings when he was unreachable for hours and returned with explanations that had too many details to be believable. Sarah had never confronted him about these incidents. A part of her did not want to know the truth, because knowing would force her to make decisions she was not ready to make. But today something felt different. Perhaps it was the casual way the secretary had called. Suggesting this was a pattern Richard's colleagues had noticed. Perhaps it was simply that Sarah was tired of pretending not to see what was happening in her own marriage. She picked up her phone and did something she had never done before. She opened a tracking app that James had installed on her phone years ago for security purposes, one that could locate any phone number she entered. With trembling fingers, she typed in Richard's number. The app took a moment to work, and then a map appeared on her screen. A small blue dot indicated Richard's location, and it was nowhere near their apartment or any other place Sarah recognized. He was on the other side of the city, in a wealthy neighborhood of high-rise condominiums and expensive restaurants. Sarah stared at the screen for a long time. Then, moving as if in a dream, she rose from the table, gathered her coat and purse, and walked out of the apartment. She did not know exactly what she planned to do or say. She only knew that she could not spend another afternoon translating technical manuals while her husband did whatever he was doing in that distant part of the city. The journey across town took almost an hour. Sarah sat on the crowded bus, watching the neighborhoods change from working class to middle class to wealthy. The buildings grew taller and cleaner, the cars parked along the streets more expensive. By the time she got off at her stop, she felt like she had traveled to a different country. The tracking app led her to a luxury condominium building with a uniformed doorman and marble floors visible through the glass entrance. Sarah stood across the street, partially hidden by a bus shelter, and watched the building's entrance. She was not sure what she expected to see, or what she would do if she saw it. She did not have to wait long. At 2:30, the building's doors opened and Richard emerged. He was not alone. On his arm was a young woman, perhaps 25, with bleached blonde hair and clothes that probably cost more than Sarah's entire wardrobe. She was laughing at something Richard had said, her hand resting possessively on his chest. Sarah felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. She watched as Richard hailed a taxi, his movements relaxed and confident in a way they never were at home. He opened the door for the woman with a gallantry he had not shown Sarah in years. Before getting into the taxi himself, he pulled the woman close and kissed her in a way that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. The taxi drove away, and Sarah stood frozen on the sidewalk. People passed her without a second glance, too absorbed in their own lives to notice the woman whose world had just shattered around her. She did not cry. She did not move. She simply stood there, processing what she had seen and what it meant for her life and the lives of her children. When she finally found the strength to move, she walked slowly to a nearby park and sat on a bench beneath a large oak tree. The afternoon sun filtered through the leaves, creating patterns of light and shadow on the ground. Sarah watched these patterns shift and change, thinking about the man she had married and the man she had seen kissing another woman. The affair itself, while painful, was almost less surprising than it should have been. The signs had been there for a long time, and Sarah had chosen to ignore them. What hurt more was the contrast between how Richard treated his mistress and how he treated his wife. The smile he had given that woman was the smile Sarah remembered from their early days together. The attentiveness, the affection, the joy, all the things that had disappeared from their marriage, he had simply transferred them to someone else. Her phone buzzed. It was James, calling with updates from the board meeting. Sarah answered, keeping her voice steady through sheer force of will. "The meeting went well," James reported. "Revenue is up 12% this quarter, and The new product line is exceeding expectations. There were some questions about expanding into the Asian market, but I handled them the way we discussed. Thank you, James. Sarah paused, then added, I may need your help with something personal soon. I'm not sure yet, but I wanted to give you a heads up. There was a brief silence on the other end. James had worked with her father for too long not to hear the pain in her voice. Whatever you need, Sarah. You know I'm here. After hanging up, Sarah sat on the bench for another hour, watching families pass by with children in strollers and elderly couples walking hand in hand. She thought about her own parents, about the love her father had described between him and her mother, a love so profound that he had never remarried after her death. She thought about the promise she had made to him and whether she had kept it long enough. By the time she left the park, Sarah had not made any decisions. But something had shifted inside her, a calcification of emotion that was both necessary and sad. She would continue to be the mother her children needed and the wife Richard expected. But she would no longer be waiting for him to become the man she had once believed he was. That evening, Richard came home at his usual time, showing no signs of the afternoon Sarah had witnessed. He complained about traffic, criticized the dinner she had prepared, and spent the evening watching television while Sarah helped the children with their homework. At bedtime, Emma asked Sarah to tell her a story. Sarah sat on the edge of her daughter's bed, smoothing the covers and looking into eyes that reminded her so much of her own mother's, eyes she had only ever seen in photographs. Once upon a time, Sarah began, there was a princess who lived in a beautiful kingdom, but no one knew she was a princess because she dressed in simple clothes and lived in a modest cottage at the edge of the forest. Why did she hide? Emma asked. Because she wanted to find someone who would love her for who she was, not for her crown or her riches. She wanted a love that was true and strong, a love that would last through all the storms of life. Did she find it? Sarah paused, her throat tight. She's still looking, sweetheart. But she hasn't given up hope. Emma nodded solemnly, accepting this answer with the wisdom that children sometimes possess. I hope she finds it, Mommy. Me too, baby. Me too. After the children were asleep, Sarah sat alone in the dark living room, listening to Richard's snores from the bedroom. She thought about the young woman she had seen, wondered who she was and how long the affair had been going on. She thought about all the money Richard did not know they had, the houses and cars and comfort they could be living in if she had ever revealed her secret. But money could not fix this. Money could not make Richard love her again, if he had ever truly loved her at all. Money could not give her children a father who valued their mother, who treated her with the respect and affection every person deserved. In the darkness of that small apartment, surrounded by furniture that was worn and appliances that barely worked, Sarah made a decision. She would not reveal her secret, not yet. She would not confront Richard about his affair, not yet. She would watch and wait, as she had been doing for years, but now with open eyes instead of hopeful ones. And when the time came, when she had seen enough to know exactly what kind of man her husband had become, she would act. Not out of revenge, though she was entitled to it. Not out of anger, though she had every right to be angry. But out of love for her children and respect for herself, the respect her father had tried to teach her and that she had somehow forgotten along the way. The night stretched on, silent and long, and in that silence, Sarah Chun, secret billionaire and ordinary housewife, began to plan for a future she had never imagined. Across the city, in a luxury apartment that Richard Davis had never mentioned to his wife, another woman was also lying awake. Victoria Lane, 26 years old and ambitious beyond measure, was thinking about the married man sleeping beside her and the promises he had made about their future together. She did not love Richard, not really. What she loved was what he represented. An escape from the life of poverty she had grown up in. A ladder to the higher social circles she had always craved. Richard had told her he was wealthy, that his wife was holding him back, that once he was free of his dead-end marriage, they would live a life of luxury and ease. Victoria believed these promises because she wanted to believe them, She did not ask too many questions about Richard's finances or his wife. She preferred the fantasy he painted for her, the dinners at expensive restaurants, the gifts he could barely afford but gave her anyway, the vision of a future where she would never have to worry about money again. What Victoria did not know was that her lover was lying about almost everything. Richard Davis was not wealthy. He was not on the verge of a promotion. His wife was not the cold, unloving woman he described. And the future he promised Victoria was built on nothing but desperation and self-delusion. The truth about Richard's situation was far more complicated than either woman knew. Years of failed businesses had left him drowning in debt he had hidden from Sarah through elaborate deceptions and forged documents. The credit cards in his wallet were maxed out, the loans he had taken were coming due, and the house of cards he had built around himself was on the verge of collapse. Victoria was part of his escape plan, though she did not know it. Richard had convinced himself that if he could just make her happy enough, impress her enough, she would save him. Her family, he had discovered through casual questions, had connections in the business world. Her father was a retired executive who still knew people, still had influence. Through Victoria, Richard believed he could find the opportunity that had always eluded him, the breakthrough that would finally make him the success he had always dreamed of being. But plans built on lies rarely survive contact with reality. And reality, in the form of Sarah Chen's newfound awareness, was about to come crashing down on Richard Davis's carefully constructed world. In the days that followed Sarah's discovery, she began to pay attention in ways she never had before. She noticed the late-night texts Richard thought he was hiding, the strange charges on credit card statements he did not know she monitored, the patterns of absence and excuse that painted a picture of a double life. She also began to pay attention to herself, to the woman she had become over 10 years of a slowly failing marriage. The tiredness she saw in the mirror was not just physical exhaustion. It was the weariness of someone who had been pretending for too long, who had suppressed her own needs and desires in service of a relationship that gave nothing back. One morning, after Richard had left for work and the children were at school, Sarah stood in front of her closet and really looked at the clothes hanging there. Faded sweaters, worn jeans, practical shoes, the uniform of a woman who had stopped believing she was worth more. She thought about the closets full of designer clothes in her father's house, now maintained by a staff she paid but never saw. She thought about the person she had been before marriage, confident and capable and sure of her worth. That woman was still inside her somewhere. Sarah could feel her stirring, waking from a long sleep, and when she fully awakened, things were going to change in ways that Richard Davis could never have anticipated. For now, though, Sarah continued to play her role. She cooked and cleaned and cared for her children. She smiled at her husband and ignored his criticism. She translated technical manuals and deposited the small payments into their joint account. And she waited, patient as she had always been, but no longer passive. The storm was coming. Sarah could feel it building on the horizon, gathering strength with each passing day. When it finally broke, it would wash away everything that was rotten in her life and leave behind something new, something true, something worthy of the promise she had made to her dying father. But first, there was more pain to endure, more revelations to uncover, more lies to be exposed. The story of Sarah Chen and Richard Davis was far from over, and the most difficult chapters were yet to come. 3 weeks had passed since Sarah discovered her husband's affair, and in that time, she had learned more about Richard's secret life than she had ever wanted to know. The tracking app on her phone had become a window into his deception, showing her the patterns of his betrayal with cold, digital precision. He visited Victoria's apartment 3 times a week, always during hours when he claimed to be at client meetings or working late. He spent money he did not have on gifts and dinners, digging himself deeper into a financial hole Sarah had only begun to understand. Through careful examination of their bank statements and bills that arrived at their apartment, Sarah had pieced together the extent of Richard's hidden debts. Credit cards she had never agreed to, loans taken out in both their names, investments that had gone wrong and been covered up with more borrowing. The total was staggering, nearly $200,000. a sum that would have been devastating for any normal family. For Sarah, it was a betrayal of a different kind. Not the money itself, but the deception, the forged signatures, the complete disregard for her as a partner. She had not confronted him. She was not sure she ever would, at least not in the way he might expect. Sarah had spent too many years watching and waiting to act impulsively now. Instead, she observed and documented, building a picture of her husband that was as complete as it was heartbreaking. Victoria Lane, Sarah had discovered, was a junior marketing coordinator at a firm that competed with Richard's employer. They had met at an industry conference 6 months ago, and the affair had begun almost immediately. Through careful research that never left a digital trace, Sarah had learned that Victoria came from a family that was struggling but respectable, that she had ambitions that far outstripped her current position, and that she genuinely believed Richard's lies about his wealth and status. In another situation, Sarah might have felt some sympathy for the young woman being deceived. But Victoria's social media accounts, which Sarah had found and studied, revealed a person whose values were not particularly sympathetic. Posts about wanting the finer things in life, complaints about having to work for a living, barely concealed contempt for people she considered beneath her. Victoria Lane was not an innocent victim. She was a willing participant in destroying a family, and she was doing it for money she thought Richard had. The irony was not lost on Sarah. Her husband was cheating on a secret billionaire with a woman who wanted him for his non-existent wealth. It was almost funny, in a dark and painful way. On this particular morning, Sarah was preparing breakfast as usual when Richard announced that he had to work late that evening. The announcement was so predictable that Sarah had to suppress a bitter smile. It was Thursday, and Thursdays were when Victoria's roommate worked a night shift, leaving the apartment empty for their meetings. "That's fine," Sarah said, not looking up from the pancakes she was flipping. "The children and I will manage." Richard grunted something that might have been thanks and continued scrolling through his phone. Sarah noticed that he was smiling at the screen, a small, private smile that he never directed at her anymore. A text from Victoria, no doubt, planning their evening together. Emma came bounding into the kitchen, her school bag already on her back. "Daddy, are you coming to my recital next week? I'm playing the lead butterfly in the spring show." Richard barely glanced at her. "We'll see, sweetheart. Daddy's very busy with work." The disappointment on Emma's face cut Sarah to the heart. "I'll be there, baby," she said, pulling her daughter into a hug. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." "But I want Daddy to come too," Emma whispered, her voice small. Sarah looked at Richard, waiting to see if he would respond to his daughter's plea. He was still staring at his phone, thumb moving as he typed a response to whoever had messaged him. The moment stretched, heavy with all the things that were broken in their family. "Your father will try his best," Sarah finally said, though they both knew it was a hollow promise. After Richard left and the children were safely on their school bus, Sarah sat down at her small desk and opened her laptop. She had a conference call scheduled with James and the other trustees of her father's estate, the first meeting she had attended directly in months. Usually, she let James handle everything, but today she had something specific to discuss. The video call connected, and Sarah found herself looking at the faces of 4 people who knew her true identity. James Wu, her father's oldest friend and her primary advisor; Helen Park, the chief financial officer of Meridian Technologies; Robert Chen, her father's cousin and the head of the charitable foundation attached to the company; and Margaret Torres, a family law attorney who had been added to the team when Sarah got married. "Good morning, everyone," Sarah said, her voice stronger than it had been in months. "Thank you for making time for this." "Of course, Sarah," James replied. "It's good to see you more directly involved. What did you want to discuss?" Sarah took a deep breath. "I need to start making preparations. My personal situation is going to change significantly in the coming months, and I need to ensure that the transition is handled properly." There was a moment of silence as her advisors processed this information. They had all, at various times, expressed concerns about Richard and Sarah's decision to keep her identity hidden. But they had respected her choice, supporting her as they had promised her father they would. Are you saying what I think you're saying? Margaret asked carefully. I'm saying that my marriage is not what I thought it was, and I need to prepare for the possibility of divorce. Sarah paused, feeling the weight of the word. Actually, not the possibility, the certainty. I just need to determine the right timing. For the next hour, they discussed the implications. Margaret outlined the legal protections already in place, the prenuptial agreement Richard had signed without realizing its full scope, the trust structures that kept Sarah's wealth entirely separate from marital assets. Helen reviewed the financial picture, confirming that nothing Richard had done could touch the company or Sarah's personal holdings. Robert talked about how to handle the potential publicity, since a divorce would eventually require revealing Sarah's true identity. James, as always, focused on the human element. How are you holding up, Sarah? Truly, I'm managing. Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes but refused to let them fall. I've suspected for a while, but now I know for certain. He's having an affair, James. He's lied about everything, our finances, his loyalty, his respect for our family. I've tried so hard to give him the chance my father talked about, to see if he would prove himself worthy of trust. But he's failed, completely and absolutely. Your father would understand, James said softly. He wanted you to be sure, and now you are. That's not failure, Sarah. That's wisdom. After the call ended, Sarah sat quietly for a long time, staring at the wall of their small apartment. The contrast between her two lives had never felt so stark. In one, she was a powerful businesswoman whose opinions moved markets and whose decisions affected thousands of employees. In the other, she was a neglected wife whose husband could not even be bothered to attend their daughter's school recital. The door buzzer interrupted her thoughts. Sarah frowned. She was not expecting anyone. She pressed the intercom button cautiously. Delivery for Sarah Davis, a voice announced. Sarah accepted the package, a small box from a jewelry store she did not recognize. There was no card, no explanation. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a delicate gold bracelet with a small heart charm. It was pretty, the kind of gift a loving husband might give his wife. But Sarah knew she was not the intended recipient. She checked Richard's credit card statement on her phone, a habit she had developed over the past weeks. Sure enough, there was a charge from this jewelry store, dated 3 days ago. The amount was far more than they could afford, another debt added to the mountain. The bracelet was meant for Victoria. Richard had made a mistake with the delivery address, probably distracted while placing the order. And now the evidence of his betrayal sat in Sarah's hands, small and glittering and utterly damning. She could confront him with this. She could throw it in his face when he came home, demanding explanations she already knew he could not give. But what would be the point? More lies, more excuses, more of the same cycle they had been trapped in for years. Instead, Sarah carefully replaced the bracelet in its box and set it on Richard's side of the dresser. She would say nothing, explain nothing. Let him find it and wonder how it had arrived there. Let him sweat, wondering how much she knew. It was a small cruelty, perhaps, but Sarah was finding that she had less patience for kindness toward a man who showed her none. That afternoon, Sarah picked up the children from school as usual. Emma chattered about her day, about the friend who had shared her cookies at lunch, about the math problems that had been too easy and the spelling words that had been too hard. Michael, quieter than his sister, held Sarah's hand and pointed out every dog they passed on the sidewalk. These moments, Sarah thought, were what made everything worthwhile. Whatever happened with Richard, whatever pain was still to come, these two small humans were her greatest achievement. She would protect them no matter what it cost her. They stopped at the park on the way home, the same park Emma had asked about weeks ago. Sarah sat on a bench while the children played on the swings and slides, their laughter carrying across the open space. Other parents were scattered around, some watching their own children, others lost in their phones. Sarah felt a strange sense of solidarity with them, these strangers sharing the common experience of raising the next generation. A woman sat down on the bench next to her, a baby sleeping in a stroller beside her. "Beautiful kids," she said, nodding toward Emma and Michael. "Thank you. They're my whole world." The woman smiled. I can tell. The way you look at them, it's obvious. She paused. I'm Lisa, by the way. We just moved to the neighborhood. Sarah. They shook hands. And Sarah felt a genuine warmth from this stranger that she realized she had been missing. Her isolation over the years had been more complete than she had acknowledged. Richard's constant criticism had made her withdraw from friendships, afraid that others would see the dysfunction in her marriage. They chatted for a while about the neighborhood, about schools, about the challenges of motherhood. Lisa was a nurse who worked night shifts while her husband, a firefighter, watched the baby. They were clearly not wealthy, but there was a contentment in Lisa's voice when she spoke about her family that Sarah envied deeply. Anyway, Lisa said as she rose to leave, the baby beginning to stir. It was lovely meeting you. Maybe we can arrange a playdate sometime? My older one is about your son's age. I'd like that, Sarah said, and meant it. After Lisa left, Sarah watched her children with new eyes. Emma was helping Michael across the monkey bars, her hands steady and patient. Michael was laughing, trusting his sister completely. They were good children, kind and capable, and Sarah knew that was largely despite their father's influence, not because of it. She had been so focused on saving her marriage that she had almost forgotten to think about what that marriage was teaching her children. Emma had already learned to seek male approval, to crave attention from a father who barely noticed her. Michael had learned that it was acceptable for a man to criticize and dismiss his wife without consequence. These were not the lessons Sarah wanted them to carry into adulthood. The divorce, when it came, would hurt them. Sarah had no illusions about that. But staying in a broken marriage would hurt them more, in ways that would not become apparent until they were grown and repeating their parents' patterns in their own relationships. When they returned home, Richard was already there, earlier than expected. He was standing in their bedroom, the jewelry box in his hand, his face a mixture of confusion and alarm. Where did this come from? He demanded as Sarah entered. It was delivered today, to this address, with your name on the order. Sarah kept her voice calm, flat. I assumed it was a gift for me. Richard's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Surprise, calculation, forced casualness. Of course it is. I ordered it weeks ago for our anniversary. They must have sent it early. Their anniversary was 4 months away. The charge on his card was from 3 days ago. The lie was so obvious, so clumsy, that Sarah almost felt sorry for him. How thoughtful, she said, her tone revealing nothing. Perhaps you should put it somewhere safe until then. She left him standing there, holding the bracelet he had bought for another woman, and went to start dinner. Behind her, she could hear him fumbling with his phone, probably texting Victoria to explain why her gift would be delayed. The evening passed in tense normalcy. Richard ate his dinner in front of the television, complaining about the food between bites. The children did their homework while Sarah supervised, offering help and encouragement. At bedtime, Michael asked why Daddy never read them stories anymore, and Sarah had to swallow the honest answer that threatened to spill out. Daddy is very tired from work, she said instead. But I'll read you an extra-long story tonight, okay? After the children were asleep, Sarah found Richard in the living room, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He had been drinking more lately, she had noticed. The stress of his double life was beginning to show. We need to talk about finances, Sarah said, sitting across from him. I've been looking at our bank statements, and I'm concerned. Richard's eyes narrowed. What's to be concerned about? I handle the money. That's exactly what concerns me. There are charges I don't recognize, accounts I didn't know we had. I need you to explain them. It was a risk pushing him like this, but Sarah needed to see how he would respond, how deep his deception went. Richard's face went through several transformations before settling on righteous indignation. Are you accusing me of something? After everything I do for this family, working myself to the bone while you sit at home doing your little translation projects. I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm asking for transparency. We're married. We should know where our money is going. Our money. Richard laughed, a harsh and ugly sound. What money do you contribute? The pathetic few $100s you make translating instruction manuals? That barely covers Emma's school supplies. Sarah felt the familiar sting of his contempt but refused to react. Regardless of who earns what, we're a partnership. I have a right to understand our financial situation. Richard stood abruptly, finishing his whiskey in one long swallow. You know what your problem is, Sarah? You don't trust me. You've never trusted me. Always questioning, always doubting. Maybe if you were a more supportive wife, I wouldn't have to. He stopped himself, aware he had almost said too much. Wouldn't have to what, Richard? Nothing. Forget it. I'm going to bed. He stalked off to the bedroom, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts. The conversation had gone exactly as she had expected, deflection and blame and barely concealed guilt. Richard was so deep in his lies that he could no longer distinguish them from reality. Later that night, after Richard had fallen asleep, Sarah crept into the living room with her phone. She had received a text from an unknown number while she was putting the children to bed, and she had been waiting for privacy to check it. The message was from James. Call me when you can. News about your husband you should know. Sarah's heart pounded as she dialed. James answered on the first ring. What is it? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. One of our security consultants flagged something during a routine check. Your husband has been meeting with someone from Meridian Technologies. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. What? Who? How is that possible? A mid-level manager named Peter Huang. They've had lunch together 3 times in the past month. We don't know what they discussed, but given your husband's financial situation, I thought you should know. Sarah's mind raced. Meridian Technologies was her company, her secret. If Richard had somehow discovered her connection to it, if he was trying to find a way to exploit that connection, how would he even know to approach someone at Meridian? She asked. We're still investigating. But, Sarah, there's more. James paused, and she could hear the concern in his voice. Peter Huang was recently passed over for a promotion. He's been expressing dissatisfaction with his position. If someone approached him with the right offer, he might be willing to share confidential information. The implications were staggering. Had Richard somehow discovered her secret? Was he trying to prove that his struggling wife was actually a billionaire, perhaps to change the terms of any divorce settlement? Or was this something else entirely? Some scheme she could not yet understand? I need to know everything, Sarah said. Who Peter Huang is, what Richard could have told him, what they might be planning. Can you find out? I'm already on it. But, Sarah, you need to be careful. If Richard is investigating your background, he might be more dangerous than we thought. After the call ended, Sarah sat in the darkness, her thoughts churning. The situation had just become far more complicated than a simple affair. Richard was not just cheating on her. He was scheming, plotting, trying to find angles she had not anticipated. She thought about Victoria, the mistress who believed Richard was wealthy. She thought about Peter Huang, the disgruntled employee who might be selling company secrets. She thought about Richard himself, a man she had once loved, now revealed as a stranger capable of deceptions she had never imagined. The walls of her small apartment seemed to close in around her. For years, she had protected her secret, waiting for the right moment to reveal her true self. But now that secret was under threat, not just from the outside world, but from the man sleeping in the next room. Sarah made a decision. She could not wait any longer for the perfect moment. She needed to take control of the situation before Richard did something that could not be undone. The time for watching and waiting was over. The time for action had come. But action required planning, and planning required information. Tomorrow, she would begin gathering everything she needed. She would learn the full extent of Richard's schemes, the true nature of his relationship with Victoria, and exactly what he thought he had discovered about his wife. And when she had all the pieces in place, when she understood exactly what she was dealing with, she would make her move. Not out of revenge, though she would be justified in seeking it, but out of necessity, to protect her children, her company, and the truth she had guarded for so long. The The night deepened around her, silent and watchful. In the bedroom, Richard snored on, oblivious to the storm gathering around him. In a luxury apartment across the city, Victoria dreamed of wealth that would never materialize. And, in the headquarters of Meridian Technologies, security consultants worked through the night, tracking the movements of a mid-level manager who had made a very poor decision. The pieces were all in motion now. The game had changed, and Sarah Chun, for all her years of patience and silence, was finally ready to play. The next few days passed in a blur of careful investigation and secret meetings. Sarah met with James in person for the first time in months, at a small cafe far from her neighborhood where no one would recognize her. He brought files and reports, evidence of Richard's activities that painted a picture even darker than she had imagined. Peter Huang, it turned out, had been approached by Richard at a networking event 2 months ago. Richard had somehow learned that Huang worked at Meridian, and he had been cultivating the relationship ever since, taking him to lunches, sympathizing with his career frustrations, dropping hints about knowing someone who could help him advance if he shared certain information. What Richard was looking for was not entirely clear. The conversations Huang reported, carefully documented by the security team that had been monitoring him since James flagged the connection, suggested that Richard was fishing for information about Meridian's ownership structure. He seemed to believe that there was a hidden investor, someone whose identity was carefully protected, and he was trying to confirm his suspicions. "Does he know it's you?" Sarah asked, her coffee growing cold in front of her. "We don't think so," James replied. "His questions have been too unfocused, too general. He's operating on a theory, not evidence. But he's getting closer. If he continues to push, he might stumble onto the truth." "How did he even get this far?" "I've been so careful." James sighed. "We've been analyzing that. The best we can figure, it started with a background check. Richard took out a loan about 6 months ago, and the bank required extensive documentation. One of the documents was your birth certificate, which includes your maiden name. From there, a simple internet search would reveal that Chen Weiming was the founder of Meridian Technologies. Put together the dates, realize that his only daughter would be about your age, and suddenly your husband has a theory worth investigating." Sarah felt sick. All her careful protection, all her years of hiding, undone by a loan application and a Google search. "What do we do?" "That depends on what you want to achieve. If you want to keep your identity secret, we need to shut down Richard's investigation quickly and decisively. If you're planning to divorce him anyway, we might let him dig his own grave. The more he schemes, the worse he looks in any legal proceeding." "And what about Huang? What happens to him?" "That's your call. He's broken his confidentiality agreement, which is grounds for termination. But he hasn't actually revealed anything critical yet. We can fire him and pursue legal action, or we can use him to feed Richard false information, or we can simply transfer him to a position where he has no access to sensitive data." Sarah considered the options. Peter Huang was not a bad person, just an unhappy one who had made a stupid decision. Richard, on the other hand, was actively trying to exploit whatever he could find. The difference mattered to her. Transfer Huang. Give him a position that seems like a promotion but keeps him away from anything important. And let's see what happens when Richard's source suddenly becomes useless. James nodded approvingly. "And Richard himself? I'm not ready to confront him yet, but I want to know everything he does, everyone he talks to, every move he makes. Can you arrange that?" "Consider it done." After James left, Sarah walked aimlessly through the city, processing everything she had learned. She found herself, almost without meaning to, in front of the luxury condominium building where Victoria lived. It was the middle of a workday, so neither she nor Richard would be there. But Sarah stood across the street anyway, looking up at the windows and wondering which one belonged to her husband's mistress. What would happen to Victoria when the truth came out? Sarah did not care about the woman's feelings, but she did wonder about the practical reality. Victoria had built her dreams on Richard's lies. When those lies collapsed, as they inevitably would, she would be left with nothing. No wealthy lover, no comfortable future, just another failed relationship and the realization that she had been used. It was, Sarah supposed, a kind of justice. Victoria had willingly participated in destroying a family. That she herself was being deceived did not excuse her choices. But Sarah found that she could not summon any satisfaction from the thought. She was tired of the lies and schemes, tired of the constant vigilance, tired of pretending to be someone she was not. Whatever happened next, however, this story ended. Sarah wanted it to be over. She wanted to live honestly, to raise her children without secrets, to build a life that was authentically her own. The walk home took over an hour, but Sarah barely noticed. Her mind was full of plans and possibilities, moves and countermoves like a chess game played in 3 dimensions. By the time she reached her apartment building, she had the outline of a strategy, a way forward that would protect her children, expose Richard's deceptions, and, finally, allow her to reclaim her true identity. It would take time to implement. There were legal documents to prepare, financial arrangements to secure, conversations to have with people whose support she would need. But, for the first time in years, Sarah felt something that resembled hope. The situation was difficult, but it was not hopeless. She had resources Richard did not know about, support he could not imagine, and the advantage of knowing exactly what she was dealing with. The next few months would be challenging. There would be pain and conflict, difficult conversations, and hard choices. But at the end of it all, Sarah and her children would be free. Free from Richard's deception. Free from the pretense of a happy marriage. Free to build a new life on a foundation of truth. It was not the future Sarah had imagined when she married Richard 10 years ago. But it was a future she could live with, and that was enough. 2 months had passed since Sarah first began her careful surveillance of Richard's activities. And in that time, the picture of her husband's deception had become crystal clear. He was living a double life in every sense, one man at home, dismissive and cold, another man entirely with Victoria, charming and generous with money he did not have. His investigation into Meridian Technologies had stalled after Peter Huang's transfer. But he had not stopped searching. He was convinced that Sarah was hiding something, even if he could not prove what. The irony, of course, was that he was right. Sarah was hiding something, the biggest secret of her life. But Richard was looking for evidence of a poor woman's attempt at deception, not realizing that the truth was exactly the opposite of what he imagined. Emma's spring recital was scheduled for the last Saturday of April, and, the whole week leading up to it, she talked about nothing else. She had practiced her butterfly dance until she knew it perfectly, every flutter and spin committed to memory. She had convinced Sarah to buy her new ballet slippers, pink with satin ribbons that Emma treated like precious jewels. "Is Daddy coming?" Emma asked every day, her voice hopeful despite everything. And every day, Sarah gave the same careful answer. "He's going to try, sweetheart." Richard, for his part, had said nothing about the recital since Emma first mentioned it. He came and went on his own schedule, barely acknowledging the excitement that filled their apartment. When Sarah reminded him of the date and time, he nodded vaguely and changed the subject. She did not push. There was no point in forcing a promise he would not keep. The day of the recital arrived bright and clear, a perfect spring afternoon. Sarah helped Emma into her butterfly costume, a beautiful creation of blue and purple fabric that the school had provided. Michael, too young to understand why he could not also be a butterfly, had been pacified with the promise of ice cream after the show. "You look beautiful," Sarah told Emma, adjusting the wings on her back. "The most beautiful butterfly I've ever seen." Emma beamed, then glanced toward the door. "Is Daddy getting ready?" Sarah had checked Richard's location on her phone that morning. He was at Victoria's apartment, where he had spent the night. His work clothes were still hanging in the closet, which meant he had no intention of coming to the office, much less to his daughter's recital. "Daddy had to go to work early," Sarah said, hating the lie but unwilling to let her daughter go on stage with a broken heart. "But he said to tell you he loves you and he knows you'll be wonderful." The disappointment on Emma's face was quickly masked by determination. "That's okay. You'll be there, Mommy. That's what matters. The auditorium was packed with parents and grandparents, siblings and friends, all gathered to watch their children perform. Sarah found seats in the third row, Michael on her lap, and a video camera ready to capture every moment. Around her, other families settled in, conversations buzzing about children and weather and weekend plans. Sarah noticed the fathers in the crowd, the ones who had taken time from work to watch their daughters dance or their sons play instruments. They did not look resentful or inconvenienced. They looked proud, excited, present in a way that Richard had never been. She thought about her own father, who had attended every performance and recital of her childhood despite his demanding schedule. He had understood that these moments were what made a family, not the big events but the small ones, the accumulated memories of showing up when it mattered. Richard did not understand this. Perhaps he never had. The recital began with the youngest children, tiny dancers who forgot their steps and wandered off the stage, to the delighted laughter of the audience. Michael watched with wide eyes, fascinated by the spectacle. Sarah kept one eye on the stage and one on her phone, part of her still hoping that Richard would appear, that he would prove her cynicism wrong. He did not come. Emma's class was third on the program. When she took the stage with her fellow butterflies, Sarah's heart swelled with pride. Her daughter was radiant, moving with a grace that seemed impossible for such a young child. The choreography was simple, but Emma performed it with an intensity that drew the eye, a small figure in blue and purple who was entirely committed to her art. Sarah filmed every moment, tears streaming down her face. This was what Richard was missing, not just a dance recital, but the chance to watch his daughter become herself. These were the moments that could never be recaptured, the experiences that formed the foundation of a parent-child relationship. And he had chosen to spend them with another woman instead. After the recital, parents gathered in the school gymnasium for refreshments and photographs. Emma ran to Sarah, her face glowing with triumph. "Did you see me, Mommy? Did you see the part where I did the big spin? I saw everything, baby. You were perfect. Absolutely perfect." "I wish Daddy could have seen it," Emma said, her joy dimming slightly. "I recorded the whole thing. We'll watch it together tonight, and you can show him your favorite parts." It was the best Sarah could offer, a digital approximation of the presence her daughter deserved. They would watch the video that evening, and Richard would probably glance at it while checking his phone, and Emma would pretend not to notice his disinterest. The pattern was so familiar that Sarah could predict every moment of it. But tonight would be different. Sarah had decided that tonight would be different. She took the children for ice cream as promised, letting them choose whatever flavors they wanted. Michael got chocolate chip with sprinkles, most of which ended up on his shirt. Emma got strawberry, eating it carefully so as not to stain her butterfly costume, which she had refused to take off. They sat at a small table by the window, watching people pass by on the street, and Sarah tried to memorize everything about this moment: the sweetness of the ice cream, the brightness of the afternoon sun, the innocent pleasure on her children's faces. Whatever came next, she would have this memory. Whatever happened tonight, she would know that she had given her children this perfect afternoon. When they returned home, Richard was there. He was showered and changed, sitting on the couch with a beer in his hand, watching television. He barely looked up when they entered. "How was the recital?" he asked, his tone suggesting he did not actually care about the answer. "It was wonderful," Sarah said evenly. Emma was the star of her class. "Would you like to see the video? Maybe later. The game's on." Emma's face fell, but she said nothing. She had learned long ago not to compete with the television for her father's attention. Michael tugged at Sarah's hand, wanting a snack, and the moment passed. That evening, after the children were in bed, Sarah found Richard still on the couch, now drinking whiskey instead of beer. The television was off, and he was staring at his phone with an expression she could not read. "We need to talk," she said, sitting down across from him. Richard looked up, something flickering in his eyes. "About what?" "About our marriage. About what's happening between us." Sarah kept her voice calm, though her heart was racing. About where we go from here. What's there to talk about? We're fine. We're not fine, Richard. We haven't been fine for years. Sarah took a deep breath. I know about the debts. I know about the forged loan applications. I know about all of it. Richard's face went pale, then red. You've been spying on me? I've been paying attention. There's a difference. Sarah held his gaze. $200,000, Richard. Credit cards I never agreed to, loans in both our names that I never signed. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? I was going to tell you, Richard said. But his voice lacked conviction. I was handling it. By taking out more loans? By digging deeper into debt? Sarah shook her head. That's not handling it. That's drowning. Richard stood abruptly, pacing the small living room. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. The expectations, the competition, the constant struggle to provide for this family, while you sit at home doing nothing. I do not sit at home doing nothing. I raise our children. I manage our household. I work on translations that pay our electricity bill and grocery expenses. Sarah's voice remained steady. But that's not the point. The point is that you've been lying to me, systematically and deliberately, for years. Lying? Richard laughed bitterly. You want to talk about lying? What about you? What about your secrets? Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. What secrets? I know there's something you're not telling me. I've been doing some research, Sarah. Your father's company, Chun Industries, was quite successful before he died. And you've never mentioned it, not once in 10 years of marriage. Why is that? So he had found something. Not the full truth, not yet, but enough to make him suspicious. Sarah had prepared for this moment, had rehearsed what she would say. My father sold his share of the company years before he died, she said, the lie smooth from practice. He used the money to pay off his debts and cover his medical expenses. There was nothing left for me to inherit. I didn't mention it because there was nothing to mention. Richard stared at her, trying to decide if she was telling the truth. I don't believe you. That's your choice. But it's the truth nonetheless. Sarah stood, feeling suddenly exhausted. We've gotten off track. I wanted to talk about our marriage, about the fact that you spend more time with your phone than with your daughter, about the fact that you couldn't be bothered to attend her recital today. I had to work, Richard said automatically. You didn't go to work today. I called your office. Another lie, but Richard did not know that. Where were you, Richard? The silence stretched between them, heavy and charged. Richard's face went through several expressions before settling on anger. I don't have to explain myself to you. I'm the one who provides for this family, who works himself to exhaustion so you can have this comfortable life. If I need some time to myself occasionally, that's my right. Time to yourself? Sarah felt the last remnants of her patience evaporate. Is that what you call it? She pulled out her phone, opened the photo gallery, and showed him a picture she had taken weeks ago. It showed Richard and Victoria outside her apartment building, caught in an intimate embrace that left no room for innocent explanations. Richard's face went white. Where did you get that? Does it matter? Sarah put the phone away. I've known for months, Richard. I've watched you lie to me, to our children, to everyone who trusts you. And I've stayed silent because I wanted to give you a chance to come clean, to show some shred of the decency I used to believe you had. Sarah, I can explain. I'm not interested in explanations. I'm not interested in excuses. Sarah's voice was cold now, all the warmth she had once felt for this man finally extinguished. What I'm interested in is the truth. Who is she? How long has this been going on? And what exactly do you think is going to happen now? Richard sat down heavily, his face a mask of defeat. Her name is Victoria. We met 6 months ago. I never meant for it to happen. It just... Don't. Sarah cut him off. Don't insult me with cliches. You chose this. You chose to betray your family, your vows, everything you claim to value. That's not something that just happens. That's a series of decisions, each one worse than the last. What do you want me to say? I made a mistake. I got caught up in something, and I couldn't stop. Richard looked up at her, something like genuine emotion in his eyes for the first time in years. I still love you, Sarah. I know that's hard to believe right now, but I do. Sarah laughed, though there was no humor in it. You don't love me. You don't even see me. When was the last time you asked about my day, my interests, my dreams? When was the last time you looked at me the way you look at her? She shook her head. You love what I do for you, the cooking and cleaning and child-rearing. But you don't love me. That's not true. It is true. And I think on some level, you know it. Sarah sat down across from him again, suddenly tired of standing. I've spent 10 years trying to make this marriage work, trying to be the wife you wanted, trying to give you space to become the man I believed you could be. And all that time, you've been taking me for granted, treating me like a servant instead of a partner, and now cheating on me with someone half your age. She's not half my age, Richard muttered, missing the point entirely. As usual, Sarah sighed. I want a divorce, Richard. The word hung in the air between them, heavy and final. Richard stared at her as if she had spoken in a foreign language. A divorce? Yes, I'll contact a lawyer tomorrow. We'll work out the details of custody and division of assets. Sarah almost smiled at this last phrase, thinking about the assets Richard did not know about. I'll be fair, more fair than you probably deserve, because Emma and Michael love you and they deserve to have a relationship with their father. You can't be serious. Over one mistake. It's not one mistake. It's years of neglect, of disrespect, of putting yourself first at every opportunity. The affair is just the final straw, the thing I can point to when people ask why I'm leaving. Sarah stood again. I'm going to sleep in Emma's room tonight. Tomorrow we'll tell the children together. And then we'll start figuring out how to untangle our lives from each other. Sarah, wait. We can work this out. I'll end things with Victoria, I'll go to counseling, whatever you want. Just don't throw away 10 years of marriage over this. I'm not throwing away anything. You already did that. Sarah paused at the door. Good night, Richard. She left him sitting there, alone with his whiskey and his regrets. In Emma's room, Sarah lay down beside her sleeping daughter, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair, feeling the small warm body curl instinctively toward her. She had done it. She had finally said the words she had been holding back for so long. The battle was far from over, she knew. Richard would not accept defeat easily. He would scheme and manipulate and try to turn the situation to his advantage. But Sarah had resources he did not know about, support he could not imagine. And she had the truth on her side. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There would be lawyers to contact, arrangements to make, difficult conversations to have. But tonight, Sarah allowed herself to feel something she had not felt in years. Hope. Hope that her life could be different, better, more true to who she really was. Hope that her children could grow up seeing their mother as a strong woman who stood up for herself, not a doormat who accepted mistreatment. Hope that the future, uncertain as it was, held possibilities that the past had never offered. In the living room, Richard drained his whiskey and poured another. His mind was racing, cycling through plans and schemes, looking for angles he could exploit. Sarah wanted a divorce? Fine. But she would not find it so easy to walk away. He had rights, legal protections, leverage. And if she was hiding something, as he suspected, he would find it. He thought about calling Victoria, telling her what had happened. But something stopped him. Victoria was part of the problem, one of the many poor decisions that had brought him to this moment. He needed to think clearly, to plan his next moves carefully. Sarah had caught him off guard tonight, but that would not happen again. What Richard did not know, could not have imagined, was that his wife had been planning this moment for months. Every detail, every contingency had been anticipated and prepared for. The lawyers Sarah would contact tomorrow were already briefed on the situation. The financial arrangements were already in place. The protection for her children was already secured. Richard Davis thought he was playing chess while Sarah played checkers. He had no idea that she was playing an entirely different game, one where she controlled the board and all the pieces. The night deepened, and the apartment grew quiet. In Emma's room, Sarah finally drifted to sleep, her daughter's hand clutched in hers. In the living room, Richard sat awake, drinking and planning, certain that he could still win. Neither of them knew what the coming days would bring, the confrontations and revelations, the moments of crisis and resolution. But one thing was certain. The life they had built together was over. What would rise from its ashes remained to be seen. The next morning dawned gray and overcast, matching the mood that hung over the Davis household. Sarah woke early, careful not to disturb Emma, and made her way to the kitchen. Richard was not in the bedroom. She found him passed out on the couch, an empty whiskey bottle on the floor beside him. She made coffee quietly, moving through the familiar routine while her mind processed everything that had happened. The confrontation last night had been years in the making, and yet it still felt unreal, like a scene from a movie she was watching rather than her own life. When the children woke, Sarah explained that Daddy was very tired and needed to sleep in. Michael accepted this without question, but Emma gave her mother a knowing look that broke Sarah's heart. At 8 years old, her daughter had already learned to read the signs of trouble in their family. "Is everything okay, Mommy?" Emma asked quietly while Michael was distracted with his breakfast. "There are some things Daddy and I need to talk about," Sarah said carefully. "Grown-up things. But whatever happens, you need to know that we both love you very much. That will never change." Emma nodded, her face serious. "I know. I'm not a baby." "No," Sarah thought, "you are not. You are growing up too fast, learning lessons no child should have to learn. And I am so sorry for that." After breakfast, Sarah sent the children to their rooms to play while she dealt with Richard. He was awake now, sitting on the edge of the couch with his head in his hands. "We need to talk to the children," Sarah said. "Together. Today." Richard looked up, his eyes bloodshot and his face haggard. "Can we wait? I need time to think, to process." "No. We tell them today, before they hear something from someone else." Sarah sat down across from him. "We keep it simple and united. We explain that Mommy and Daddy still love them, but that we're not going to live together anymore. We answer their questions honestly but age-appropriately." "You've really thought this through." "I've had months to think." "While you were with her." Sarah did not bother hiding the bitterness in her voice. "Are you going to cooperate? Or do I have to do this alone?" Richard shook his head slowly. "I'll do it. I owe them that much." They called Emma and Michael to the living room, sitting them down on the couch between their parents. Emma immediately sensed something serious and took her brother's hand. Michael, oblivious, asked if they were getting a puppy. "No, sweetheart, no puppy," Sarah said, managing a small smile. "But we do have something important to tell you." What followed was one of the hardest conversations of Sarah's life. She watched her children's faces transform as they absorbed the news, Emma's expression shifting from confusion to understanding to a terrible sadness. Michael's showing only bewilderment at concepts he was too young to fully grasp. "But why?" Emma asked, tears streaming down her face. "Why can't you just try harder?" "We've been trying for a long time," Sarah said gently. "Sometimes, even when people try their hardest, they realize that they're better apart than together. It doesn't mean we love you any less. It just means that the way we're living now isn't working. But I don't want you to split up." Emma was crying openly now. "I want us to be a family." "We'll always be a family," Richard said, his voice rough. "That won't change. I'll still be your daddy, and Mommy will still be your mommy. We'll just live in different houses, that's all." It was, Sarah thought, perhaps the most genuine thing Richard had said in years. Whatever his failures as a husband, he did love his children in his own limited way. That love might not be enough to change his behavior, but it was something. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of tears and questions and attempts at reassurance. Sarah held her children close, promising them over and over that everything would be okay. even when she was not entirely sure it was true. Richard, to his credit, stayed present and engaged, answering questions and offering comfort instead of retreating into his phone or his own concerns. By afternoon, the initial storm had passed. The children were watching a movie in their room, and Sarah was in the kitchen making lunch on autopilot. Richard appeared in the doorway. "I've been thinking," he said, about what you said last night, about me not seeing you." He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "You were right. I haven't been a good husband, not for a long time. But I want a chance to change that." Sarah turned to face him. "A chance to change? Richard, you've had 10 years of chances. You've had countless opportunities to be present, to be engaged, to treat me like a partner instead of a housekeeper. And you've squandered every single one. I know. And I'm sorry. Truly sorry." Richard took a step toward her. "But doesn't our marriage deserve one more chance? For the children, if nothing else. Don't use the children as leverage. That's exactly the kind of manipulation I'm talking about." Sarah shook her head. "The children deserve parents who are happy and healthy, not parents who stay together out of obligation and make each other miserable. So that's it? You've made up your mind, and nothing I say will change it." "I've made up my mind because I finally saw clearly what our marriage has become. And yes, that clarity is final." Sarah turned back to the counter. "I'll move into Emma's room for now. As soon as possible, we need to figure out more permanent arrangements." Richard stood there for a long moment watching her back. Then he turned and walked away without another word. That afternoon, while the children napped, Sarah called the number James had given her for Margaret Torres, the family law attorney on her advisory team. Margaret had been waiting for this call.